All right. Can you all see
Yep,
what I'm saying?
we see it.
Yep.
Great. All right, let's present. Cool. So I love Appalachian Bear Rescue. Like Katrina and Greg said, I've been working with them, I would say, over the last year or so, just to try and help and get the word out. The Cubs Forever campaign, things that you guys are I'm sure are very familiar with, and just help as much as I can with things moving forward. And they thought it would be really fun for me to come on and teach one of these classes for you guys, for the members. So thank you, first off, for being a member and supporting Appalachian Bear Rescue. And tonight we're going to talk about eastern black bears as ecosystem engineers in Appalachia. With me, John, I'm a naturalist. I've been a naturalist for 2 decades now, I would say, since I'm old. Started at the Nashville Zoo when I was a young, sprightly fella. If you ever came through and saw the amphitheater shows about 15 years ago, you probably saw me fighting for my life to be as cool as Steve Irwin. Still hasn't happened. Someday, no one will ever be that cool, though. Let's be real. Okay, so yeah, in this presentation, and what we're going to talk about tonight, just to give you a little overview, so we're going to meet the eastern black bear, the subspecies, and how they are just a little bit different than the rest of our American black bears. And what does ecosystem engineer mean? Really important to define that term up front. Their diet and ecology, we're going to talk about how it differs in Appalachia from other regions. Seed dispersers, bears are nature's foresters, something that Greg can tell you a whole lot about too, which Greg can tell you a whole lot about all this stuff too. So hopefully he's going to be helping me out as well. Bears as trailblazers, which is one of my favorite topics and Greg's favorite topics, and that's bears and their wildlife trails. If you or anyone in your family hunts or is an outdoorsman, you might know that as game trails. And then number 6, we've got soil turners, the bear's foraging impact. And we've got, for number 7, black bears as conditional apex predators, which is something else I've studied a lot. And then number 8, bears, biodiversity, and habitat, just to kind of break it down, round it all out, and move us on. And just to give you a little bit more of an idea, I'm gonna talk, but I'm also gonna have pretty much every single thing that I say on these slides. So if you prefer reading and you're tuning me out, perfect. You do you. I would much prefer you be able to read things just in case you can't really understand what I'm saying or I'm speaking too fast, et cetera, et cetera. So I will also be more than happy to send this presentation out if anybody wants it afterwards. And I've also linked to some resources and further reading at the end that I'm sure that everybody would find interesting because you're here. So thank you again for being here. First up, we meet the eastern black bear. This is Ursus americanus americanus. You just pop another americanus on the end of Ursus americanus, which is our American black bear, and it's the eastern black bear. And the eastern black bear is one of about 16 recognized subspecies of black bears in North America. That number wavers and varies, as Greg could, I'm sure, talk about too. It's very interesting to watch whether people, how many subspecies of black bears they think we have on the continent. One of the things that makes them very different here, especially in the Great Smoky Mountains, is they're typically all black in color. And we have very few brown or other coat colors, unlike those Western subspecies. And you'll occasionally see that white chest blaze, like if you know Wishbone from one of the visitor centers in the park, and that really pretty white marking. I would say about, what, 30 to 40%, I think, the last time I talked about that.
They say around 30. You know, it's a funny one. I won't talk too much, but in my experience here, only adult females, as far as adult bears go, would retain blazes into adulthood. You see more blazes on cubs just because you'll see male cubs with blazes, but I have never caught an adult male bear with a blaze. And the guys I worked with in the park all said they never caught an adult male bear with a blaze. You know, you'd see it on a yearling, maybe a 2-year-old still. And then by the time a male is an adult, you wouldn't see him, but females would have more. And so 30% is what they would say. In the Smokies, I'd kind of say it's probably a little less, but there were areas where you would see more blazes, and I thought it was just gene pool, you know, would kind of push it in some areas.
That's really interesting because I've never photographed a boar with an adult with a blaze, so that makes sense.
I've never seen one, not here, you know, maybe elsewhere they are, but not here. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. And another thing, unlike our Western or Alaskan relatives of these bears, our bears are mostly forest dependent rather than fish or marine food sources. And the reason that I mention this just right off the bat is if you spend a lot of time in the Smokies like we all do, and you go around, you see the gift shops, and you'll see a bear carrying a salmon like a wood carving or like in a painting or on a plate or something. And that's just not really something you're ever going to see here. That's very Alaskan imagery and iconography, right? These coastal bears. That's not really something that you're ever going to see here in the park. And our non-habituated bears rely heavily on oak, hickory, bear-producing shrubs and seasonal vegetation here. And they really evolved alongside our Appalachian hardwood forests for thousands of years. And you can really see some interesting data when you start correlating the foresting and the deforestation in the park alongside the habits and existence of our black bears. But this species is incredibly adaptable, which is one of the reasons they persisted despite centuries of human encroachment and hunting. So what we're going to talk about is, what does ecosystem engineer mean? And a very simplified definition of an ecosystem engineer is a species that physically modifies its environment and creates habitat structures or alters ecological processes that benefit both itself and other species. So black bears are included in this category because their feeding behaviors, their movement, and their waste distribution redistributes nutrients and modifies vegetation and all that fun stuff. And their intelligence, their memory, and their dietary flexibility are key traits that allow them to function as ecosystem engineers. So as far as their diet and ecology goes, for me, I think it's important to understand what these bears are eating, specifically in the park and in Townsend and in our Great Smoky Mountains area of Appalachia versus other regions. And that makes a big difference in what type of ecosystem engineer a black bear is going to be. So for an Appalachian black bear here in the Great Smoky Mountains, studies show that Appalachian bear diets are mostly plants, about 65 to 85%. And that's fruit, seeds, vegetation, varying percentages of insects, and deer meat also go on top of that. But really, these bears are eating a whole lot of plants. And curiously for us, they eat a whole lot of yellow jackets in our area too, which is great for us and everybody else that comes through the park.
Yeah, a lot of insect larvae for sure. I think people underestimate, a bear in the mountains where there are healthy insect populations, because, humans have a way of getting rid of insects in areas. But yeah, you see more excavated yellow jacket nests than you see intact ones, in my opinion, out hiking.
Yeah, I would say so too. And termites too. Termite mounds, logs that have termites in them. They love termites, which is great.
Yeah.
Seasonal changes are pronounced, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And what that basically means is what they eat is very seasonally dependent here in Appalachia. And so to contrast this with those coastal bears like we were talking about in Alaska, black bears are eating salmon and intertidal resources in some of those areas, and that dramatically increases that animal's protein intake and that transferring of marine nutrients into forests. And that is significantly different from what we see with Appalachian bears, who rarely exploit fish or marine resources. So as far as that seasonal diet goes, in spring, we're going to see them eating a lot of grasses, a lot of succulent shoots and roots and buds, alongside anything else that they can get their mouths on. Summer, you're going to see berries, blackberries, blueberries, huckleberries, black cherries, fruits, a bunch of other stuff. And in fall, the acorns are a big thing, especially white oak. We've got hickory nuts and walnuts. It's called the fall shuffle. Whenever I talk to anybody in the park for the last, several decades, it's a big deal. And then their year-round opportunistic feeding is a whole lot of insects and grubs and termites, yellow jackets, like Greg and I were just talking about, a lot of larvae, like Greg said. Honey is an interesting one. It's one of those like myths tied to bears, that bears don't necessarily love honey as much as we all think they do. But then there's current research that says that bears can smell honey from 3 miles away and they will blaze a path to get to it. So if there's honey in the Smokies somewhere, you can bet your bear butt that a bear is going to get to it. Carrion, which is dead animal waste or decaying corpses, occasionally rodents or white-tailed fawns, etc., etc. And then their foraging habitats, bears will travel a long distance, miles, to find productive high-energy food sources. And this can create a lot of human-bear conflict in today's world. So in areas like Gatlinburg and campgrounds, bears are attracted to trash and human resources, as we all know, and it's essential to keep that food and waste secured to prevent habituation, which is often fatal to the bear. And during those travels outside of Gatlinburg, outside the Smokies to anywhere else, they're crossing roads, they're entering subdivisions, downtowns, places that aren't bear aware, bear wise, bear prepared. And we've seen a whole lot more of that in the last several years, especially in Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee, where we haven't had black bears for about 100 years. And they're coming back and they're finding food sources that there is no competition for. And some of them are starting to stick around. And whether they'll start breeding elsewhere, we'll find out. Okay, so in Appalachia, that oak mast and bear nutrition. So in the Southeast Appalachians, which is the Great Smoky Mountains, bears rely heavily on mast crops like acorns and hickory nuts, and years of high acorn production, mast years, influence bear reproductive success and seed dispersal patterns. And that has a direct impact on how much of an engineer they're going to be that year. And the ecosystem impact of that is by eating and scattering these seeds, bears contribute to oak regeneration and forest structure, especially important in our Appalachian hardwood forest. These guys are literally married to the forest that they've lived in and have been for millions of years. So as far as that seed dispersing goes, bears as nature's foresters, this is one of the biggest ways that bears are ecosystem engineers. Greg and I were talking about this a couple of months ago. I have a bunch of persimmon trees up on my property. And if you have black bears in the same area as persimmons, you have a lot more persimmon trees because bears love persimmons, which so do coyotes, fun fact. But there are so many more seeds in a persimmon than you'd think there'd be. And the nitrogen and phosphorus and all the things that are in bear scat do an incredible job for fleshy fruits to grow. And there's some really interesting research from some colleagues that suggest that bears are almost a necessity, as are other carnivores that will actually eat the fruits for persimmons to thrive, which I think is really interesting.
John, I've heard similar stuff with the native plum trees to this area that we don't really have, the Chickamauga plum and stuff, unless people have propagated and kept them, you don't see those plums. And it's easy to understand with the persimmon just as well. People say there used to be a lot more persimmons and, you only see them around old home sites. And when bears were, knocked down in their population for 50 to 100 years with deforestation, some of those species, like these fleshy fruit trees, probably took a detrimental hit to their reproductive cycle and success in the wild, I think, because, plums must have been more places than just people's homes, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And persimmons as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think that speaks exactly to these bullet points that we've got here. Because black bears eat a large quantity of berries, fruits, and nuts, and they deposit those seeds, just like Greg was saying, across the landscape in their scat, often hundreds at a time. So if you look at that scat on the left side of the screen, that's a summer scat from a black bear full of berry seeds. And I mean, I've seen, and I'm sure Greg and Katrina have too, just some dinner-sized plate loads of scat that are just almost nothing but seeds in the summer. Especially if bears are around blueberries, they'll poop out a whole bunch of undigested blueberries just because their stomachs are moving the stuff and churning it so fast that a lot of the seeds and unripened fruits and everything else, they don't get digested at all, which is perfect for the ecosystem because then they just get plopped with this natural fertilizer encoding them. And then they have so much more better of a chance to grow. And also, like Greg was saying, and what I was saying in the earlier slides, bears travel such a large distance that they're really key to cross-pollinating and cross-propagating and all kinds of stuff in ecosystems and biomes, that they bring these seeds much, much, much further distances than other animals will, especially in the numbers that they bring them, which is key because germinating is not always, that's not a guarantee for a seed. So if you have 1,000 in one spot, you're much more likely to get a fleshy fruit tree than you are if you just have one or two in a bird droppings or something else.
Yeah, definitely a numbers game there. And bears' digestive systems are simple stomachs, just like ours, right? But they obviously can digest a lot more plant matter than we can. But it's interesting how you mentioned that, John, that, they poop stuff out so fast. And if we think about some of the cubs in our care when we're feeding them a lot, man, it is incredible how much poop a bear can produce, especially a small bear, especially a cub. And I know some of you followers, you guys have seen the videos and stuff. I mean, we clean up a lot of bear poop at ABR, and it's incredible what a 20-pound bear cub can put out. And you think about just the speed their digestive system works, definitely faster than ours. And I've never done an all berry diet, but I don't want to because I don't think it'd be a lot of fun. But bears don't have much of a choice.
Yeah, man, I don't know. Stick to the T-bones and share. Send one my way next time. I don't think I could survive on berries either. Love them, but not as the only thing I eat. Yeah, let's see. We touched on that one. We touched on that one. And yeah, we just touched on that too. Bears can defecate thousands of seeds that might never germinate without that long distance transport. And like we were mentioning earlier, that scat adds nitrogen and phosphorus and other minerals and nutrients to the soil where the seeds are deposited. And I mean, that is just like putting the best fertilizer in the world down on seeds that you really want to grow. It is difficult to overstate the impact that bear scat has on their ecosystems. I would say, and Greg corrects me if I'm wrong, from my experience and from what I've seen, I would say this is the main way that they are some of our most productive ecosystem engineers.
Yeah, I'd agree because without bison and elk in large quantities and stuff, you don't have anything larger creating larger disturbances around here than bears. Other than wild hogs, which are non-native, creating similar kind of levels of disturbance, but in a way the ecosystem is not adapted to. Bears kind of carry the torch around here that other large critters, bison, elk, wolves, cougars, all those other ones that were missing would have helped create way different landscapes, and I don't think we'll ever get back to that perfect landscape here, not in my lifetime, but I wish we could.
Yeah, you and me both. Well put.
Of course, I'll bring bison back with you, John. We'll bring
there you go. More to come. More to come on that. Oh man, top of the bucket list. And yeah, you can see elk on the other side of the park now, as you guys all know. But yeah, we keep hearing it's only a matter of time for them to come to the east side of the mountains. But even if they did, their numbers would not be equal to, nor would they be inhabiting the same spaces as the black bears. So they are going to be and remain incredibly important to our Great Smoky Mountains and the surrounding areas. So as far as trailblazers, bears and wildlife trails, this is something that I've always been very fascinated by. And what I mean by this is the process of bears, elk, and bison, like Greg and I were just talking about, creating trails in the wild. And this is generally referred to as making game trails or wildlife trails. This is a really, really cool thing that animals do that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And there's multiple ways they'll do it. One of the ways is the path of least resistance, which a lot of us humans do this too. And that's why we're running into things and bruising ourselves all the time. We create trails by following the easiest route between ourselves and whatever we want, whether that's a food source, water, bedding areas, all that stuff. So just like generalized daily trampling can create a pretty rudimentary trail. And sometimes they can become very developed over time. One of the most fascinating aspects of this to me is the generational use. And bears in particular may use the same trails for generations, and they create what we call century trails that are sometimes worn into the solid ground. So many bears have used them. So a mom will walk it with their cubs. Those cubs will grow up walking it. They'll walk it as yearlings, even if they go out and explore and try and find their own territory. Some of the bears will stick to that trail, and then the sows, their cubs, will walk the same trail, and that just perpetuates. And that is one of the coolest ideas in the world to me. So many of our road systems here in Nashville were created on bison trails and indigenous American trails that were originally bison trails. And I've heard stories growing up from some of the elders in the Appalachian region that there were a lot of very famous generational bear trails there as well that have either been turned into a different type of trail or have since been destroyed. But I just think that's one of the coolest concepts of bears making their own highways. And they also do this with marking behavior, which bears often leave scents on these trails by walking on them in a stomping, marking fashion. They look drunk to some people, but there's a lot of scent marking and marking behavior that goes into bears leaving trails for each other too. And go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, John, bears like our trails, right? They use the trails we've created, and the question is, are they our trails or are they the bears' trails? And did we just put the trail where the bear had already, built it? And so, in the park we have the Appalachian Trail, right? Very convenient highway across the crest of the Appalachians, but probably a bear was walking that Appalachian Trail before we were, and I've done a lot of off-trail hiking in the Smokies, and you get on some ridges sometimes, and it is a bear highway, and because you have to crawl in some places. It's really clear up to 3.5, 4 feet, right? And then you're like, man, it's super stomped out, and you can see even the footprints in some places where it's just worn down, and obviously you'll come across a lot of bear scat, another bear sign, but bear trails are really easy to follow if you are at the bear's eye level. Walking a bear trail, sometimes you're pushing through a lot of stuff at waist high and up.
Man, that sounds awesome. You need to go out and find one again for everybody and film it, and just crawl on all fours.
With a GoPro, crawl through. You'll see it. Yeah, in the roto, you'll find bear tunnels in the roto.
Yeah, big time. Oh, that would be awesome. We need to do that. We should go film that. That would be really cool for everybody to be able to see that. But yeah, these highways, just like Greg was explaining, they become highways for other species too, and this shapes biomes. Some species will follow these places and go places they never would have before, but it also makes easier access. And animals are just as curious as we are. And if they see a trail, they're going to follow it. Just like bears are extremely intelligent and curious. And just like Greg said, they love our trails. They follow our trails all the time. And other animals are the same way. So the next topic,
the drunk-like thing there. Sorry, I probably threw you off.
Go ahead.
In your slide there, you had where they do that drunk-like walking. So I don't know, folks, feel free to chime in if you guys know what that means, that stomp marking. You'll see bears kind of do like a waddle, and it's kind of like this slow, but they're very purposeful how they put their paws down, and it kind of looks like they're stumbling almost. But they're really trying to put their scent in the ground. And we've had people see bears walk like that before and call us and say they think it's hurt because it's walking funny. And, you'd be like, is it walking with a sway? Is it kind of, they're like, yeah, like he's sick or something. And it's funny, we have people call and they, and that's just a bear. It's usually a big male, who's trying to put his scent down. He's walking kind of with a swagger, as my coworker used to call it, walking with a swagger.
That's a perfect word for it. It's one of those things that it's hard to describe to someone, but once you see it, you'll know it for the rest of your life. It's a very, very unique thing to see a bear do. And you definitely do, you're like, wow, okay, this poor guy has brain damage. He doesn't.
Yeah, why is he walking?
No, he just wants a lady.
He just wants to get it on. Exactly. All right. Thank you, Greg. So number 6, we've got soil turners. And this is one of the things that Greg was talking about in reference to our invasive boars as well. Bears are foragers. They're excellent foragers. They're built for foraging. And as far as digging and soil disturbance goes, when bears dig for roots, tubers, insects, and other foods that they eat very often, they aerate the soils. They improve our water infiltration and nutrient cycling in those soils. And this physical soil disturbance increases microhabitat, it increases the complexity, and it benefits everything from invertebrates and plant establishment to another iconic species we love here in the Smokies, the salamanders, all kinds of really, really cool stuff. That is like the most bare bones description of this possible, because it is not my area of expertise, but I would love for Greg to elaborate on it if he feels up for it.
It's not my area of expertise either, but I think that people underestimate, and this is something I've learned, from my time working with bears and then just reading, they underestimate how important trampling and digging is. And it's funny because I think, our human developed areas, because we're, really smart monkeys, we have to replicate these effects to get the desired, environments. We use tools to dig and turn over soil. We do all this stuff that nature also does in its own way, whether it's bears or bison, hoof, trampling and stuff, or elk with their antlers, wallowing, digging up the ground. There's all these animals, and bears are one of the most, I think, versatile. But there's all these animals who do these processes that we as humans try poorly probably to replicate in our own environments, and it's just funny because you just don't think about, you think about other animals. People oversimplify bears and other animals. They say, oh, all they're interested in is food and mates, right? And it's like, maybe as far as their thoughts go, they're a little simpler. They're thinking about food and mates, but in the process of pursuing food and mates, they do a lot of things that we probably don't give them enough credit for, whether they're intelligently doing it or it's just instinct. How's that?
Very well said.
I made that all up.
Thanks, man. 10 points to Gryffindor. So, and the ecosystem effects, just like we were both just saying, this is increasing the soil aeration and the speed of decomposition, and increases nitrogen and other nutrients in previously compacted soil. If you ever see somebody, agriculturist, tilling a field, they're doing backbreaking work by machine or human that bears do very naturally. And black bears as conditional apex predators. This is my jam. I know this is something that Greg is going to love too. Another really interesting aspect of bears, our bears specifically as ecosystem engineers, is in the absence of wolves and all these other animals that we were talking about earlier, cougars, any other large predators. Recent research suggests that black bears sometimes exert top-down pressure on prey populations, which can also influence behavior of other large carnivores. This is very, very interesting stuff to me. I've spent a lot of my career researching this out in national parks and state parks. And what top-down pressure is that limits prey populations through altering their behavior, which prevents overgrazing and promotes biodiversity. And this trophic cascade occurs when predators keep herbivores and smaller predators in check, and that allows our primary plants and producers to thrive, which stabilizes the ecosystem structure. One of the most powerful examples of this is out in Yellowstone with the wolves returning, and how much it helps control the deer and elk populations, as well as a whole bunch of other populations, and how much of an effect that has on the entire ecosystem. And there's a lot of research that's come out since to get really in the weeds that says that this type of ecosystem engineering that we thought was happening wasn't really happening, but the evidence is so clear. And as soon as you have a large carnivore present, it alters the behavior of every other animal in the ecosystem. That's why it's called that top-down pressure. And for eastern black bears, this is really pronounced in areas where other large predators, like wolves and cougars, like we were saying, are absent, which is the case today for Appalachia. I mean, we have sightings yearly, but it is very unlikely that we have enough breeding populations of cougars anywhere close for them to become any sort of presence in the park again anytime soon. We tried red wolf reintroduction. It didn't work. They're down to like 30-something individuals, and they're over in North Carolina. We do not have any other large predators anywhere in the vicinity of our black bears, period. And, we've got our coyotes, but coyotes are not large predators. They do not have the same effect at all. If a coyote sees a black bear of any sort of size, they're going to turn around and go the other way. And our bears are not really active hunters. I've watched and trailed some really big boars that have definitely found a taste for meat and flesh and will actively hunt things, but those are an exception, not the rule. Most of our bears are not going out and waking up, and the first meal that they're thinking of is a deer or their fawn or something that's going to be much more difficult to track down and take down than a berry bush. Greg, I would love for you to hop in here and tell us any stories or any more information that you have as well.
Yeah, I love this conversation, because people ask you about this a lot. And what you're saying there, John, like we don't really even know what this part of Appalachia would be like if we had the wolves and the cougars and the bison herds and the elk herds and porcupines and fishers, right? These other critters that we're missing. We're missing a lot of critters in this area, and bears are carrying the torch for a lot of, mid-size and larger animals that would have created all kinds of different disturbances and effects in our forests and our landscapes here. And a lot of those animals, unfortunately, can't really live in coexistence with humans in the population densities that we have here. Bears are good at it. I think bears would prefer less humans. I think if you asked them, they'd say, hey, there's a little bit too many of you guys here. But bears, they have that adaptability to go from, eating primarily berries to foraging on, to finding deer fawns. And there's bears who I think are really good at finding deer fawns. And there's bears who I think maybe never find a deer fawn. I think that's more the common bear is, they stumble upon a deer fawn and they're lucky. I don't think that the average bear is good at finding them. I think a lot of them walk around and eat grasses and whatever they can find and hope they find one. Then, when it comes to the hogs, bears really don't take down adult pigs unless, it's a sick or wounded one, but they'll take the piglets, right? And like you were saying, some of the big boars, the big male bears boar, I think some of them are really good at it, but that's very few in the bear population. The ones that, probably are eating 50% of their diet might be meat because they're just really good at finding meat. Protein is a little hard to come by on this landscape for most of the year, other than insects and grubs, and then carrion, right? The dead animals. So, but when it comes to this top-down pressure, I think that there are a lot of animals who coexist with bears comfortably, right? Because bears don't like, a coyote. Is a bear going to kill a coyote? I'm sure there's bears who've killed one, maybe really run them off. But a lot of bears might, be like, yeah, there's a coyote over there. And that coyote's like, oh, I'm a little afraid of you. I'm going to keep my distance. But they're not going to really displace each other. They're not going to push them like wolves and cougars really will push, these things across the environment. And there are a lot of plants. There's a lot of vegetation, a lot of habitat that, benefits from having that complete trophic cascade of all these critters in there. And that's where, our ecosystems, like our wetlands and our meadows, really suffer by not having some of the engineering that happens there. And I think bears do their part, and we just need more in this environment. And like I said, John and I are going to try and bring back some bison, sneak them in here, and maybe a porcupine or two, because, porcupines used to be here and they're not here. And I want to know why. Why can't we have porcupines back? I don't think they'd hurt anything.
Yes, please. I don't know if you've seen one in the wild. I'm sure you have. But anybody else watching, the first one I ever saw was in Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, and it was one of the coolest things. Yeah, I mean, they're big rodents, and they're so unique, but you don't really realize the scale and the size of a porcupine until you see one in person. I mean, they're bigger than beavers, and they're just covered in crazy. That's a completely different topic, but yeah. Bring back the porcupines. Long live the porcupines.
Hey, a porcupine probably push a bear around,
I would not doubt that for a second.
You get a couple quills to the face. There's some bears out there that don't even know what it's like to be poked by a porcupine.
Isn't that the truth? And like Greg was saying about the pigs, the boars, which not a male bear, but our invasive species, the boars. There was a video that went around very heavily of a black bear and an adult boar fighting outside of I think it was right outside the park in the North.
Yeah, it was out. Yeah, it was just outside the park. Yeah,
I love to have people watch that video before and or after the conversation of I would love to pet a bear. And it's unbelievable. And Katrina and Greg can attest to this much more than pretty much anybody else in Appalachia, how much strength even a little baby bear has. These animals are built like tanks. They are pure muscle. They are extremely strong, and they're extremely intelligent on how to use that strength. And that video is a very, very powerful example of just how easy it is for a bear to take down a boar of the same size if they feel it's necessary. Like Greg was saying, they're not going to go out and be like, "Oh, that looks like an easy meal."
They don't like the chase. That the chase is the part that bears don't like. They're kind of a little bit too lazy to chase. I've seen a bear jump on a deer's back before that it snuck up on in Cades Cove, and the deer kicked it off and ran. And the bear was like, "All right, I'll let you." Like, he let him go. He didn't even run after him. He's like, "I know I'm not catching you. I'm not gonna." But he did sneak up on the deer and jump on it. The deer was bedded. So that was impressive, for him. But bears are really good at grabbing and holding, killing. They try to break backs. They try and break this, and they're just not great. And that pig video is a good one to show how long it takes for a bear to actually, kill a prey animal. It's a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. They tend to paralyze things first, actually, before they even kill them if they are successful. But compared to a cougar or wolf, bears don't have nearly the success rate at taking down prey like that. And it's because they don't have to. They can go eat berries, right? So it's kind of, I'd rather be a bear. If you gave me a choice between being a wolf, I'd pick a bear all day. Being a wolf's hard,
right? So incredibly stressful. I think about that every time I watch or study wolves or anything else like that. They're incredible animals, but God, that seems stressful to be hungry just literally all the time. It sounds like my
you
worst
got to
nightmare.
go run. You got to go run a couple marathons to eat dinner or
While
something.
you're hungry. Yeah. No, thank you. I'm going to go to the next slide because Greg and I will talk about that for the next 2 hours, which I love. Maybe we can do an education night on that topic alone. But thank you very much for bringing in your really awesome experiences and expertise.
I just make it. I make it up, John.
Oh, nice. That's cool. You heard it here first, folks.
No one knows I'm telling the truth or making it up. There's no one there to confirm the stories.
Perfect. Greg is a fraud. That's the next slide. So for bears biodiversity and habitat, this is kind of just an overview because we're coming towards the end. I want to make sure that we have time for us to answer questions and engage with you guys. But a bear's ecosystem engineering also supports wildlife, which is something we really haven't touched on. But that's a really important part of being an ecosystem engineer. And they do so by opening foraging patches through digging. They're promoting seed spread for fruiting shrubs that feed birds and mammals, like we talked about. They're enhancing those soil conditions for diverse plant and animal communities, like we talked about. And they're also enriching riparian corridors that safeguard waters and streams. And that's really important. And we haven't touched on that as much because I like to tell people I'm a very land-based naturalist. But even with working with folks at Tremont and taking a bunch of those classes, I've got to stop saying that because everything is so interconnected, and bears are a really excellent example of that because they're interacting with and shaping their ecosystem all the way up from the treetops where they are all the way down to those riverbeds and streams. So if that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend researching it because it's very fascinating stuff. And other research shows that each of these bear behaviors drastically increases biodiversity within their chosen habitats. And that we kind of talked about across the board. And like Greg said, with so much megafauna extant, non-existent here in the Smokies and in the greater Appalachia, black bears are stepping in for so many species. They are not just big raccoons. These are really fascinating, multifaceted, large mammals that are incredibly important to their ecosystems, and that makes them very important to us too. This also, of course, a phrase that most of us have heard: bears are acting as a keystone species when their presence is increasing those ecosystem resiliences. This is definitely a keystone species for us here in the Smokies. So just to kind of review everything so we can get through this and answer some questions and talk and hang out with you guys. Black bears in Appalachia are not just charismatic wildlife. They are ecosystem engineers. And that means they spread seeds and shape vegetation patterns. They're modifying soil structures and nutrient cycles. They're creating trails and biomes used over centuries. They're influencing food webs beyond their trophic level. They're differing ecologically from other regional bear populations, as we talked about in the beginning, and so much more. And the big thing that I'll drive home anytime I ever get a chance to talk about bears is each of these things benefits humanity too. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. That's one of the biggest failings of Western civilization, to get on a soapbox, for me, is the separation mentally from nature. Just like Greg said off the cuff earlier, we're just really smart monkeys, guys. We are nature. Everything that we create and do is part of nature. And the more that you can just kind of take that in and breathe it and think about it in your daily life, it changes everything for the better, I think. So thank you guys very much for supporting black bear conservation. You're a member of Appalachian Bear Rescue. That's why you're here, or you're here because I invited you. So thank you for coming. I know that you're all very conservation-minded people, and we can't do any of this without you guys. So here are the sources and further reading. Those will be available. I'll send them over to Greg and Katrina so they can either email them out to all their members if you guys want to, or I can share this entire presentation, whatever you want to do. And a lot of you would have found out about this on Facebook because Appalachian Bear Rescue has an incredible Facebook following, but go follow them on Instagram too, which I've linked to right here. So when we send this presentation, go follow them there. Let's help them build up their presence on Instagram too. It's a very useful platform. And I'm on there as well as the Land Conservancy that I work for, TennGreen. But thank you guys very, very much. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and we can get back to people and hang out.
I just want to mention that a lot of those pictures of bears in there, John, those are pictures that you took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So John's also a really good photographer.
Thanks. Yeah, lots of photography and videography and lots of bear photos from lots and lots of years of studying bears. One of my favorite things.
We got a lot of time for questions here. I think we saw the first hand raised was
And
PJ,
it might have been
right?
an
Or was that,
accident,
I don't know,
but-
PJ, was that an accident? I saw PJ had a hand
No,
up.
I was trying to find the chat, but I won't use it. I'll
Oh.
just use the microphone.
Go ahead, yeah.
So yeah, you talking about the porcupine.
Okay.
I haven't lived in East Tennessee for decades, although my family has lived there since Boone came over the Gap, and they're still there. And from Chattanooga to Knoxville on both sides of the river. And it seems to me that in addition to a dearth of porcupines, there's not much left of a skunk population. Is that the case?
You know, that's one of the things that some people are studying, especially at North Carolina. The spotted skunk specifically has seen a decrease in its population, and people don't really know why. They blame it on coyotes, and they say, oh, the coyotes really good at catching spotted skunks, and there weren't coyotes here until the 80s. And everyone says in the 80s there was a bunch of skunks. So that's what I've heard. John, have you heard anything about the spotted? Striped skunks too have seen a decline, but the spotted skunk especially has seen a sharp.
Man. If you talk to people, I don't think most people even realize we have two species of skunks here in Tennessee and in the broader area. I have only ever seen a spotted skunk once in my entire career working in this state and in the area. So that alone, I think, kind of tells you that you're right, because my dad saw them all the time. And that would have been in the 80s, the 70s, and all that stuff. We still see striped skunks all the time, and unfortunately, they're very easy roadkill candidates. So I don't think their numbers have been affected very much. I know for a fact they haven't been here in Middle Tennessee, but I would be curious what that's like in East Tennessee right now. But yeah, just spotted skunks alone, I think there's been a pretty drastic decline. And is the last time that I heard anybody talk about it, it was kind of just we don't really know what's going on. There's just less of them now.
Yeah, and Lee Merrill said I see both in Polk County. It's interesting. Further south seems to be more spotted skunks from what I've heard from the surveys. The bottom corners of Tennessee and North Carolina have had better. I did get a video from someone of a spotted skunk at Fontana Dam. I picked up a roadkill spotted skunk in Cades Cove area, and I have had them on a trail cam once or twice in the park. But there's some researchers from, I think it was North Carolina State and Clemson, both surveying for spotted skunks heavily in the Southern Appalachians. And they just say that the populations are thinner than whatever the data they had from the 80s. And they not really sure why, but they say coyotes could be part of it, because there weren't coyotes here until about the 80s. And a wolf, may have been a predator on a skunk for sure, but coyotes, being smaller and a little bit sneakier, they're kind of better at getting those little tiny, mesocarnivores like skunks than a wolf would. They target them more. So people do theorize that coyotes have destabilized some of the smaller, rodent and other critter populations because of the different ways they hunt. So, armadillos, Lee. Armadillos are new to the area in the last couple of years. I picked up one of the first armadillos in the park about 5-6 years ago, and there's been a couple ever since, every year. So
how old were you when you saw your first armadillo in Tennessee, Greg?
How old was I?
Yeah. Do you remember the first one?
I've never seen one in Tennessee until the one in the park that was roadkilled that we picked up. And then we had one on a trail cam, but I hadn't been to Middle Tennessee and seen them until probably that same time. But I know there were more, across Middle Tennessee, and I'd seen them in South Carolina. But
they showed up in West Tennessee, made their way to Middle Tennessee, and then East Tennessee, and that was such a wild thing to watch. See, I think I was in college and saw one in Murfreesboro, my early 20s. And it really did freak me out, like not in a scary way, but just in like, if this is such an alien animal to see in Tennessee, that's been a very interesting thing to watch, and not a very good one either, because they carry a whole lot of nasty diseases.
Yeah, leprosy. Carol's got a good question about chestnut blight. So Carol, this is one of the things I like to talk about a lot. I'm sure John has his feelings on chestnut blight. Chestnut blight.
State
and then
question.
So Carol's question, guys, sorry, in the chat, she says the chestnut blight have an impact on the bear population. And for those who don't know, the American chestnut got hit hard by a blight fungus from Europe in the early 1900s. people started seeing the chestnuts dying in the Northeast, and so everyone started cutting down every chestnut tree they could to harvest it before it died. And there were probably some chestnut trees, American chestnut trees, that would have been blight resistant. But they found some that are naturally somewhat blight resistant, but people went ahead and harvested all the chestnut trees. And chestnut trees in the Appalachians were supposed to have made up 1/3 to 2/3 of the canopy, which is crazy. And if you see these pictures of these old chestnut trees, they were giant, and there'd be 6 people standing all around one, and people lived off of chestnuts. I love chestnuts personally, and bears love chestnuts because we fed our cubs a lot of chestnuts that we get donated, and they like them way more than acorns. Everything eats chestnuts, and chestnut trees produce chestnuts every year. They were a staple, and there are people I've heard say that the decline in the bear population coincided with the chestnut decline. And, people blame overhunting, and they blame the deforestation, which is tied to the chestnut blight. But people think it took a very long time, relatively a long time for bears to recover from that chestnut blight hit. And that's why bear populations in the 50s, 60s, 70s had really bottomed out. And then as forests recovered and bears, adapted, you saw the populations boom again. But that's what I've heard. John, you feel free to comment on the chestnut blight. I'm sure you've heard.
No, that's exactly right. And when you weaken a species by taking away one of their main food sources, it's going to be much, much easier for that human encroachment to just completely wipe out a species. I don't think people really understand just how few bears there were here. Mid 1900s. We were down to the hundreds to thousands. And I even think that's an overestimate of what we probably had left, even in and around the park. Like Greg was saying, I think the last time I saw an estimate, it was like 4 billion trees, I think is what they estimated were killed.
Yeah.
Not blight. Like it was a tremendous amount of trees.
Yeah. From Georgia all the way to, Vermont, I believe chestnuts were as far north as Vermont, maybe New York, northern New York. So you're talking about bears across all of Appalachia and the plateau, the Alleghenies. Everybody took a big hit. Bears in the Midwest didn't rely on chestnuts as much, as you got into those regions, but agriculture is really what, wiped them out. Where there was good soil to be had, bears didn't have much of a chance out there.
Also, you think about chestnut trees and how giant and wide their canopy is. That means that you didn't have nearly as much rhododendron. You didn't have all of those mid-story to low-story, trees and shrubs and things. It looks significantly. I would love to go walking in the Smokies in the 1920s.
Or maybe the 1820s, because 1920s is a lot.
There would be a lot of as many trees. But it's significantly different as far as what the actual forest looks like, besides just not hiding the trees.
Yeah, the canopy would have been tremendous, and that's one of the things you don't even know what to reference off of, because there's not any old growth with all those things in there to really gauge what it looked like. The hemlocks are taking a hit right now, and we're saving hemlocks that we can, but when you lose, chestnuts and hemlocks, it's like, man, what else did you have to make a canopy? So oaks and other things have to kind of take over, but it's not the same forest. And bears, credit to them, can adapt and survive, in these changing environments. Carol says there's a virgin forest in West Virginia, the Cathedral Forest. I've heard someone I didn't know what that was called. Someone was telling me about West Virginia having a virgin old growth forest there. It's a pretty big one intact. Joyce Kilmer, John, Joyce Kilmer, Slick Rock area has some growth, and it's old growth poplar and some other stuff. But obviously chestnuts are nowhere to be found, and
it's crazy. God, it's crazy to see these trees mature. They're kind of like our versions of redwoods, I would say. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that. My brain just screamed that at me, so I'm sure that's elsewhere. But just thinking about like the trees, the scale that we used to have of the trees here, and how different the park looks now, especially with the underbrush, like Katrina was saying. And it's a fungus, and it goes everywhere. And just like the white nose that's killing the bats and everything else, as soon as a fungus figures out how to kill a species, they become so effective, virus level efficiency, and it's really, really hard to control this stuff. But the park's doing all they can, as our partners across Appalachia. So, I mean, the short answer, I think the question was, does that impact the bear population? The answer is yes, it absolutely does. But it's not something that, like Greg said, they're so adaptable and they have so many other food resources. It's just like having a poor mast year. They're going to move to another source. But I mean, if all the chestnuts were gone, that we would absolutely see, I think, that affect our bears.
Yeah. If all the oak trees died out, what would happen next? If all the acorns were gone, right? And so
And I think that point brings me to someone on one of the tours or facility tours last week asked me, or she made a comment about, we said now we have 1,900 bears estimated in the park. Ryan Williamson, a National Park Service wildlife guy, thinks that there's probably more than 1,900 at this point, just like in the national park and the surrounding, close areas. But that was, up from an estimate of 500 back in the 90s, right? And so she's, the joke is, I keep on saying bears are coming out of our ears, and that's where, you talk about part of the reason Appalachian Bear Rescue was started was to try to support that population growth from 500. Obviously we've come a long way since then, but she made a comment about like, well, how easy would it be to accidentally or not trying to, but wipe out the population again, or significantly reduce the population again from something else that comes up, whether that's a disease or something that humans do, or things like that. And I think it's something important to think about, that there's a lot of conservation efforts that we've put into place and a lot of thoughtfulness in that direction. Or like, oh, the joke about well, there seems like bears are doing just fine, even though more and more cabins are being built and more here, like this, that, and the other thing that humans are doing. Bears don't seem to be affected by that. But it's like, it doesn't take a whole lot, and it can just be one thing that decimates the population once again.
Yep. And it's very important to think about that pocket that you're talking about, that heart. That's all 95% of what Tennessee has left of black bears. There's one other pocket, and if they're gone from that area, they're not going to be traveling as much across the state. We have them coming from other regions. Some of the bears that we've seen in West and Middle Tennessee are coming from the Ozarks and other places. But yeah, that's a silly argument for somebody to bring up, because the Smokies and Townsend and everything surrounding on both sides of the park is like the last bastion for the species.
Yeah, it's more fragile than people think. People, they take the Smokies for granted. They think, oh, there's so many bears. Why does one bear matter? Why? It's like, well, why does any of it matter? And it's like this 500,000 acres is a national park, and we're just lucky to have a space just big enough to support all this, right? Like, I don't think 500,000 acres is big. I think 500,000 acres is just big enough to keep some stuff intact. It's the right 500,000 acres. So Kirsten Bagus, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Bagus or Bagus, says, are the wild pigs exerting pressure on the bears? We would say that, and I used to say to people that, bears and hogs directly compete against each other for just about everything. And to get people to really support us reducing the hog population, we would say that the pigs are eating all the baby bears' food. That may have been a little bit of an exaggeration, but we would say, if you don't want us to kill these pigs, do you want a baby bear cub to starve because he's got nothing to eat? Because the pigs are going to eat everything. And pigs are super aggressive foragers. The one thing that bears do have over pigs is the ability to climb. Pigs have to wait until acorns fall out of trees to eat them. Bears can eat them when they're up in the tree. But as far as all the other foods that are on the grounds, yes, pigs and bears do compete for the same ones, and pigs do reproduce a lot faster, but pigs don't live as long. So a bear can live to be about 20 years old in the wild. I've seen bears over 20. A wild hog rarely makes it past 6 or even 7 for a female is ancient for a wild hog in the wild. So that's where some of that balance goes. Bears live a lot longer, and pigs have a lot higher piglet mortality than bears do cub mortality. And so some of that depends on your predators in the area and other factors. But pigs do directly compete. And if you don't keep the pig population down, it probably does negatively impact the bears for sure. And they think that was part of the bear population recovering in the 80s. The park started killing the pigs much more aggressively. They hired people that actually, you know, got paid full time to do it, and they actually wiped out a lot of pigs in the 80s and got the population down to a manageable number now. So the pigs are at a much more manageable number. But back in the 70s and 80s, the hog population was probably double or even triple of what it is now, and it was uncontrolled. So that probably did you know, impact them at the time recovering. So I see, Jeanette, you found the bear fighting
I
wild
can
pig
put the
video.
link. I just got the link if people are interested. It's kind of
Yeah.
loud.
Yeah,
There's a lot
It's
of-
gonna be pretty easy to find.
It's kind of graphic, just FYI.
Hey, but what better way to end this than bring it
Yeah.
on?
Here,
Let's
I'll-
go National Geographic with this. right
Yeah.
now.
Any other questions, guys?
I saw a couple more questions come through, but just to
Um,
add to what Greg was saying, if anybody ever tries to justify an invasive species as destructive as the pigs sticking around, talk to any of our salamander biologists and anybody who's studying amphibians in any aspect and see how much they're damaging those populations as well.
Yeah,
It's
the
definitely-
plant.
They do compete with the bears, but it's just
Yeah.
there are so many other detrimental reasons in the ecosystems why we don't want those hogs around.
Yeah, the plants and the salamanders are actually way more impacted.
Yeah.
And I saw a question about trichinella. We actually studied that when I was in the park. The trichinella that the pigs carry, you know, is the same as what the bears carry. It's the same, you know, parasite. They all carry it, so it's kind of either or. A bear can carry it just as much as a pig can. They're both hosts for trichinella. So if you ever do harvest a wild pig, just like a wild bear, you know, hunters are cautioned to not, you know, they need to cook wild pig and wild bear meat well enough to make sure to kill the trichinella, because anything, either one could be carrying it just as likely. What does that last one say? RCS. Would you consider providing your slides for personal review? I was a little late. Yeah, we'll send the slides out, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, very happy to do that. And I'll go ahead. I'm going to drop the link right now. There's a link to it. It's on Canva. You don't have to have a membership or anything to view it. You can just
there you go.
click this link and watch it. And then I'll send all the details and stuff over to Greg and Katrina, and they can send out to you guys in a more usable fashion. But there's an immediate source right there.
And then I did record this, so I'll be sending that to members as well, obviously for people who couldn't join, but in case you wanted to watch it again.
And why wouldn't you?
And we'll see. Hey, we'll see all you guys at the concert March 29th, Rocking for the Rescue at the Shed in Maryville. So buy your tickets if you haven't.
The early bird pricing
Pricing
is going to go away.
It's going to go up
gonna go
next
up.
week. So get your tickets to the concert if you haven't gotten them.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much for having me. This has been awesome. Let's do it again. And thank you guys so much for supporting ABR and our black bears and our ecosystems. Y'all rock. Keep it up.
Thanks,
Thanks,
John.
everybody. Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
guys.
Bye.